So here we are. It's Wednesday and it is snowing quite a lot today. So I chose a book that takes place in a snowy place. So yesterday we talked about the word setting as related to a story, and the setting of this story is in a snowy forest. That might be something you recognize based on where we live. This one has to do with two main characters, one main character and one kind of second character. And the characters live in a little cabin in the snowy woods, and the story takes place in the winter, just like what I'm seeing when I look out my window. How about you? When you look out your window, can you see all that snow coming down back to winter again? This is called The Mitten. It's written and illustrated by Jan Brett. And in this story, you can see the little hints on the sides. I'll give a little extra time to the illustrations so you can look at the author's hints on the side, illustrations about what and who is coming next into the story. The Mitten by Jan Brett. One of the pages we haven't talked a lot about in a children's book, and actually in grown-up books as well, is the dedication page. When an author or an illustrator or both put so much work into a project like writing and illustrating a book, lots of times they will dedicate it to someone. And that's just to kind of honor someone, and sometimes they dedicate it to their family members, sometimes they dedicate it to friends or people they've known. And in this one, I don't know who these people are that Jan Brett is dedicating it to, but it says, for Sylvia Kyle, Ruth Ann Johnson, Rebecca Lim, and Tad Beagley. So maybe they're her friends, her family members, who knows? But that's what the dedication page is. Once there was a boy named Nicky who wanted his new mittens made from wool as white as snow. So here's the main character, Nicky, and on the sides you can see there's an older woman here who is spinning yarn. On this side, it looks like she is getting ready to do something with that yarn once it's spun. So we'll see who she is and what she might be doing with the yarn. At first, his grandmother, Baba, did not want to knit white mittens. If you drop one in the snow, she said, you'll never find it. Think about that for a little bit. Why would he not find his mitten if he dropped it in the snow? Well, if you ask yourself what color mitten he was requesting, that'll give you a big, important clue. If he wanted snow white mittens and he dropped one in the snow, then you can think about why it would be hard to find. But Nicky wanted snow white mittens, and finally Baba made them. The clues on the side pictures here that are shaped like mittens are just snowy trees, so they don't give us a lot of information on that one. After she finished, she said, when you come home, first I will look to see if you are safe and sound, but then I will look to see if you still have your snow white mittens. So off Nicky went. And it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped in the snow and was left behind. So again, this is kind of an empty snow picture here. And on this side, you can see an animal. We don't know what the animal's going to do yet, but I can tell you that that'll be a little clue for what's coming up next. A mole, tired from tunneling along, discovered the mitten and burrowed inside. Two words I want you to think about in that sentence. The first one is tunneling. And if you don't know what the word tunneling means, you can think about a tunnel is a place that you might find on a road if you're driving in a car. For example, if you drive up toward the lakes in Mammoth, toward the lakes basin, you go through a little tunnel on your way. It's where there is a covering that is built over the road that cars or people can go through. Well, in this case, when they're talking about a mole who tunnels along, what they're talking about is that animal spends most of its life, very little time above ground, Most of the time it's underground, building tunnels, which turn into its home, and with other moles might turn into a whole kind of community of tunnels where they build little rooms. We read a story about a mole family earlier in the school year, and we talked a lot about how moles don't have very good vision. They can't see very well because they don't need to. They live underground where it's completely pitch dark most of the time. And so what they do have really strongly are the senses of smell and of touch, and they have incredibly strong feet with really long claws that help them to dig, because that's what they spend their entire lives doing. So if you remember that story, it was super fiction. It was about a mole family that wanted to learn more about Santa Claus at Christmas time. And so they were spending some time figuring out how to get to the top of the earth where Santa Claus would be, and not underground where they were. And they wanted to see the stars, and so he brought them a telescope. Do you remember that? Anyway, so that's the word tunneling. And then the other word I want you to think about is burrowed. It says that he discovered the mitten and burrowed inside. Burrowing is what lots of animals do. That's what an animal would do in a tunnel. It would burrow inside, kind of climb inside and stay there. But in this case, the mole is climbing inside the mitten and staying there. It was cozy and warm and just the right size, so the mole decided to stay. So here's Nikki walking along in the snow, and here is a rabbit. So we'll see what's going to happen with that rabbit next. A snowshoe rabbit came hopping by. He stopped for a moment to admire his winter coat. That means he stopped to look and like what he looked like in his winter coat. It was then that he saw the mitten, and he wiggled in, feet first. The mole didn't think there was room for both of them, but when he saw the rabbit's big kickers, he moved over. So here's Nikki still exploring in the snow, and there is another animal coming along here. So we'll see who that is. Next, a hedgehog came snuffling by. Having spent the day looking under the wet leaves for things to eat, he decided to move into the mitten and warm himself. The mole and the rabbit were bumped and jostled, but not being ones to argue with someone covered with prickles, they made room. There's Nikki again. There's the snowshoe rabbit, and there is the hedgehog wiggling his way into the mitten. And then in the next picture, you can see who might be coming next. As soon as the hedgehog disappeared into the mitten, a big owl, attracted by the commotion, swooped down. When he decided to move in also, the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog grumbled. But when they saw the owl's glinty talons, they quickly let him in. So talons are the special name for the feet or claws of a bird of prey. And if you'll remember, what that means is that this bird preys on other animals, and it needs very strong, sharp claws to do that. So preying in this context means that the owl hunts and eats other animals. And so he might swoop down and eat a mouse, or he might swoop down and eat a fish. But in any case, whatever animal that owl decides to eat, it has to have those strong talons to grab onto it and eat it. And glinty would just mean they're a little bit shiny and a little bit scary to those animals that are already in the mitten. They're thinking, well, there's really not room in here, but I'm not going to tell them no. Are you? And I think they're probably all deciding not to in that case. If you look under the tree, that's the next character coming along. And in this picture, Nikki doesn't know his mitten is missing yet. He's still exploring. Up through the snow appeared a badger. He eyed the mitten and began to climb in. The mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, and the owl were not pleased. There was no room left. But when they saw his diggers, they gave him the thumb. So his diggers, that's just another way of saying his sharp digging feet and claws, because badgers tend to dig a lot also, and they also dig into trees and things to find food. And so giving him the thumb means that all three of these other animals are just like, come on in. We'll figure it out. Four of the other animals, not three. Nikki continues to explore here. And in this picture, we see the next animal coming along. Do you see how that mitten is expanding, which means it's stretching and getting bigger with every animal that gets in there? It started snowing, but the animals were snug in the mitten. A waft of warm steam rose in the air, and a fox trotting by stopped to investigate. Investigate means figure out what's going on. He's going to stop and say, why is there steam coming from that mitten? Just the sight of the cozy mitten made him feel a little drowsy. The fox poked his muzzle in. When the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl, and the badger saw his shiny teeth, they gave the fox lots of room. There's Nicky still playing in the snow. The fox making his way into the mitten. And look who's coming next. A great bear lumbered by. We talked about that word lumbered when we studied bears. And we just finished that right before school ended on last Friday. We were talking about all the things we've learned about bears. And one of the things is that the way they move is very kind of clunky and slow. And we even practiced kind of lumbering a little bit, a few steps in our classroom on the carpet. When a bear lumbers by, it doesn't mean he's running by fast like a fox. It means he's really taking heavy steps, one at a time. That's a word that can describe how a bear moves, lumbering. He spied the mitten all plumped up. Not being one to feel left out in the cold, he began to nose his way in. The animals were packed in as tightly as they could be, but what animal would argue with a bear? The mitten swelled, which means it got bigger, and stretched. It was pulled and bulged to many times its size, but Baba's good knitting held fast. That means it just did not come apart. Here's Nicky looking way off into the distance. And then what's coming next? Along came a meadow mouse, no bigger than an acorn. An acorn is the seed of an oak tree. We don't have any oak trees up here. They're not the type of tree that grow here, but the seed is pretty small. And so when the mouse is coming and they say it's the size of an acorn, we know that's not very big. She wriggled into the one space left and made herself comfortable right on top of the great bear's nose. So I'll give you a close-up look at that, and then I want you to look at Nicky's picture as well. There's the mouse on top of Bear's nose, and what does Nicky notice in that picture? He looks where one mitten is and notices the other one is gone. The bear, tickled by the mouse on his nose, gave an enormous sneeze. Ka-choo! The force of the sneeze shot the mitten up into the sky and scattered the animals in all different directions. So now Nicky's spending his time looking for the mitten. Meanwhile, which means at the same time, the animals are flying in all directions as the mitten pops off of all of them. Nicky's still looking for his mitten. On his way home, Nicky saw a white shape in the distance. It was the lost mitten, silhouetted against the blue sky. So there are some of the animals that are kind of slumped in the snow where they landed after the big sneeze. Here are the rest of the animals slumped in the snow after the bear's big sneeze. And then there is the mitten, silhouetted against the blue sky. I want to talk about that word a little bit. Silhouette is a word you might not have heard before. And what that means is basically kind of the same thing. What you hear that word a lot of when you're talking about is shadows. When you make a shadow with your body, another word to describe what it does is a silhouette. And so you don't have a really clear picture about the details of what you look like when you look at your shadow, but you can see the shape. And that's basically what the silhouette is of the mitten as well. So you can't really see the details of something that is silhouetted in the sky. Like if the sun is kind of shining in a certain direction, it makes it hard for you to see the details of something that might be flying through the sky, but you can still see its shape, its silhouette. And that's what's happening there with the white mitten. He can tell it's a mitten, but he can't see the details. As he ran to catch his snow white mitten, he saw Baba's face in the window. First, she looked to see if he was safe and sound, and then she saw that he still had both of his new mittens. The animals are all going back to their places. And then there's Nicky grabbing that mitten on his way home. There are no words on the last page, just an illustration, but I want you to think about what Baba might be thinking about when she holds one mitten in one hand and one in the other and compares them, which means she looks at both to decide what things are the same and what things are different. What do you notice is different about those mittens when he comes home? I noticed that the one that the animals were all in is really stretched out and much bigger than the other one that didn't have animals in it. One of the other things that I was thinking about in this story that makes me know that it's probably fiction, definitely fiction, is that one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about with bears, and lots of the animals in this story actually fall into the same category, is they do something in the winter that's different than cruising around in the snow and finding a mitten to crawl into. What is that thing that they do in the winter? What do those animals do in the winter when it's cold and snowy? It's a big long word with 3 beats, 3 syllables. They hibernate, which means to sleep for a long time. And we talked a lot about that. Lots of those animals do that. A rabbit, for the most part, hibernates in the winter. A badger, for the most part, hibernates in the winter. All of the animals kind of slow down and find places to stay for more time than they're out and about. So I hope you liked it, and I'll see you again tomorrow.